Okay, welcome to Digital Thangka Workshop. Today's an unusual day. It's snowing here in the Australian Alps, and it's springtime, and no better time to stay inside and be warm and work on a little bit of art. So today we're going to work on a tutorial to work out how to create a mantra using digital means, which looks as though it's been scripted with a brush. So without further ado, we'll get inside back into the warm and we'll start the tutorial. Okay, here we are back in the warm and starting our tutorial. I'll show you where we're going to try and get to today. Our goal today is to try to create a circular mantra that has a hand brushed look to it. So you can easily do this in Illustrator or even Photoshop would probably do it, and you could type along a circular path in Tibetan, but it's always going to be a font. And it's going to look mechanical, and the spacing is going to be very hard to get right. So we're trying to produce some art here, and art needs to, in my opinion, move away from that mechanical look. It needs to be hand done. So as always in my tutorials, I try to emphasize this devaluing of the digital look and to try and get it back to something that looks as though it's been painted by hand with a brush. So that involves purposely adding so-called imperfection to your work and variation. So let's go step by step now on how we got to this finished result, and we'll begin by looking at our document. So when we open our document, I created something that's considerably larger than I need in the end. This is, I think, is 3,000 or maybe 4,000 pixels square. In the finished piece of art that I'm working on, it's only going to be very small, and it doesn't need to be that big. But there's two reasons for doing it large. First reason is you never really know when or what you'll use this work for in the future. So it's always best to work at a nice high resolution, and that gives you much greater flexibility in the future in terms of what your art can be used for in terms of different projects. For example, you may have a Thangka which requires this mantra to be very large, and so if you're working at sufficient resolution, you'll have that option in the future rather than having to redraw it, or even worse, blow up something that's at low resolution. The second reason, which is perhaps even more important, is that within this whole process from start to finish, each character or each brush stroke within the character may require transformation, warping, scaling multiple times. And so whenever that happens, the computer needs to interpolate pixels to approximate what you're trying to do as you scale it, or you rotate it, or warp it, or transform it. And each time that happens, then there's a softening to the edge. And if that occurs multiple times on one character, that character will be blurry, the other characters will be sharp. If there's any subtlety to your brushwork, that will be lost. So when you work at a very high resolution, it gives the computer much more data to be able to work with when it interpolates and changes those characters. Okay, so that's that. Let's take a look at our reference material. So first up, if you, I'm thinking anyone's going to follow this tutorial, you can have varying levels of understanding of the Tibetan language. You may not have any understanding, and you may just be copying characters, and that's fine. I know a little bit of Tibetan, so that helps. You know what the characters are meant to look like, and you know the spacing and the proportions, and you can also check if something's correct or not quite easily. There's a lot of variation on the way that mantras are written. So it helps to know a little bit. But assuming you don't know anything, what you'll have to do is you'll need to find an existing copy of the mantra. And probably the best place to start is just a computer-generated font. Because all of the fonts are very meticulously created, and the letter spacing is in general correct. So they'll have worked out all the problems for you, and you won't have to work so hard with the proportions of the letters and spelling and things like that. So let's take a look at our reference material. So I've just copied this out of a text. And what we have here is as you can see, is the Tibetan, and then the Sanskrit equivalent. So that's very helpful, because if you know both languages, you can check for mistakes. And then of course the English, Om Sabhava Shuddha Sava Dhamma Sabhava Shuddha Hang. And this is the mantra of dissolving things into emptiness, or the dissolution of phenomena into emptiness. So we're attempting to do the Tibetan version today. We're not going to do the Sanskrit. And what we have, as I said, is our reference material, which we're assuming is correct. Tibetan mantras are very hard because it's what's called Tibetanized Sanskrit. So they've taken the Sanskrit characters and they have to create some very unusual characters in the Tibetan, such as a stack of 4 characters here, and if there was a vowel it'd be 5 characters, which doesn't occur in Tibetan. It only would occur when Tibetan is trying to spell Sanskrit words, which is what we have here. So let's get our proportions correct, and then we can start doing some drawing. So in order to get your proportions correct, all we're going to do is we're just going to copy the font. And in order to do that, we're going to pull down some guides. And to get the guides, there's no ways to do it, but the easiest way is just to press Command or Control R, which is the shortcut to bring up the rulers. And then with the Move tool selected, you drag down from there and you start bringing the guides to where you need them. So the first guide you need is going to determine what's called the head stroke. And that's this dashed line that occurs all the way along. You'll need another guide which determines the height of your overall letters. And what that means, so this is an individual character here, so this Sa, for example, is finishing there. Sa finishes there. This part of the Om finishes on that line. Then you can bring down another guide which relates to the beginning of the stacked letters. So what that means, if this stack of letters here, or characters, begin at a certain point all the way along, and that's making a liar of me there, that's on cue there. Some other lines you could have would be where there's a surmounted letter, this Ra that occurs above the Ba, that is consistent all the way along. So you can see this character starts there, that character starts there. There's nothing else. It fits a few characters. As I said, this isn't going to exactly follow the rules of the Tibetan character spacing, because it is a Sanskrit version of the characters. You can bring another guide down here which gives you the Let's not worry about that one. This would be a good guide. Let's so for these letters are a little bit longer, so we can finish the point of our om there, this va there, this stacked letter here, and the stacked letter there. So there's our guides, and just pick the ones that are going to make sense to you. Now, so we'll just remove our reference material now. Just going to move that down, and this is the part where we'll actually start stacking our letters. So there's a couple of things you could do. One would be just to trace over the font, and so a way of doing that would be to reduce the opacity all the way down, and then with your brush you can just start brushing in like that. So that's one way you could do it. That would be quite quick. I don't get such good results that way, so I'll show you an alternate way. And what I do is I create a little database of strokes. So within this there are not as many kinds of stroke as you might imagine. You probably need to draw about 20 lines, and then you just have to add them together using cut and paste. And the reason I do it that way is you end up getting a much more consistent look to your characters if you're using the same stroke each time. It'll have a consistency throughout the work. So maybe that's not making sense, but we'll get to work, and we'll hopefully it'll make sense. So the first thing we want to draw is this. This first letter is the om, and we're just going to work on that brush stroke there. So before we begin, we need to get a decent brush. So by pressing F5 you can get up the brush palette, and I'll show you the brush that I've selected. I've come down to, there's some really fancy brushes in Photoshop. I haven't been able to get them to work the way I'd like to, so I just use a fairly basic brush. I've got this 17 pixel brush here, which is sampled from a sponge, I believe. And all you need to do is you need to, when it first comes up, it'll be a round brush. You need to get it so it has a little bit of a chisel to it. A bit like a calligraphy pen, and you need to orient it so that it's at about 45 degrees, and for some brush strokes you may change the orientation. And what that means is that when you draw, it draws differently, like a calligraphy brush, depending on the orientation of the brush. Sometimes it'll be thin, sometimes it'll be thick. I like to have something a little bit what am I trying to say? Something that's capable of producing a line that's a little bit like a brush, so it has some variation inherent in it, and that's caused by the spongy sample. You can see when I hover my brush over that it's quite rough, which means that there's sections which will appear bristle-like, and that's what you want. You could do the same thing just by using the round brush and making that into a chisel point, but it'll be the line won't be as dynamic. Okay, so once you've got your brush sorted, you just need to have shape dynamics with pen pressure, and this little button here, and that'll turn that on. That just means that it'll be thick when you press heavy and thin when it goes light. Now, depending on how good you are, you'll have this is going to take a long time or a short time. What I do, I'm not good. So the technique I've come up with is you choose your line you're going to do, and you just, without worrying too much about it, you just draw them. You can come down in size, you can draw quick, you can draw slow, whatever you like. And you can draw 10, 20, as many as you like. And just relax, just take the pressure off. And then all you need to do is you just pick the best one. So I'm going to pick that one, so I'll just take the lasso tool, I'll delete everything else, and then that brush stroke, I just sit up there and it stays up there as a reference. Okay, next brush stroke, let's do this line coming down here. So again, just drawing. And if you're not having much luck, which I'm not, okay, that one's not bad. You can muck around with your pressure settings in the in whatever utility controls your brush. In my situation, it's the Wacom. So that's not a bad stroke there. So lasso, get rid of everything else. And I'll put it up there to be sampled. Okay, next stroke. So our downward stroke. Okay, that's a good one. I'll take that straight up. Okay, so here we are in the sped up section, and this was going to take a very long time, so I've just sped this up. It's 3 times faster than I'm actually working at the moment. Here we're just getting the next section of the Om, which is the head stroke and the Tsek. So again, just taking a few options, picking the best one. When you're doing that, just you can draw with your eyes closed, you can have them open, draw quick, draw slowly, listen to different music, whatever you like, just be creative. There's no pressure, you get to draw, you can do 100 strokes if you want to, and you just pick the best one. And it's quite a nice way to work. It's really free of the usual constraints of having to get it right in a certain number of goes. So here you can see I'm really struggling to get the taper at the end. And of course you can always just draw, here I'm editing and you can just draw it from scratch. But I like to get that random nature of the randomness of the stroke of the pen. I think that's important. So here I am on the ovale and the top part of the Om letter, and this was hard. So I'm just sort of mucking around with a couple of different angles of the brush here. I think I changed the angle of the brush in a second. In the end, I think I abandoned it, trying to do it in one brush stroke and choose 2 brush strokes. So you'll see that last line I just did there. Now I'm trying to add one to that and not having much luck. So just changing the angle of the brush, experimenting. That's not working either. That's not too bad. Let's see what happens here. I'll pick one of these eventually. So okay, so here I've decided that one's kind of close, and if I just touch it up a little bit with the eraser, that'll be sweet. You can see when I zoomed in there, you can just see those little smudges and those little artifacts left by the bristles of the digital brush, which is what I really like to keep, and what will help you to have that, get that digital look out of your picture. So here, just removing everything other than what I want, and just copying up to my little sample pile. Now here, the Anuswara had a lot of goes at this. I wasn't having a lot of luck today. Some days you do well, some days you do bad. We'll pick one soon. Getting impatient now. Can't decide. There we go. We'll keep that one. And yep, that's up there into our clipboard. Okay, so now we're going to start creating a letter. So we're just going with the first part of that head stroke there, using our guides that we created earlier to line up the correct height. They're just transforming the stroke so that it's the correct length. And now just piecing it together like a jigsaw, doing some transformation, adding a little stroke on the top there. When you work this way, it's very slow in the beginning, but once you get started and you start getting some areas to sample from, then it gets really, really quick, and eventually you end up with a whole alphabet, and you can just cut and paste everything. So, for example, if I need an A syllable, an Om, an R syllable, anything from now onwards, I can just copy this character straight. Here I'm just touching it up a little bit, bringing down the O vowel, Anuswara, which, if you don't know, is that adding that little naught at the top gives the M sound. So adding that changes it from O to Om. And pretty happy with that. The spacing is not quite right in that letter, so I think I'm about to fix that. Let's have a look. Obviously, it really helps if you're familiar with the Tibetan script, because you can pick up those little imperfections in scale. Otherwise, you just don't know what you're looking at, and you have to rely more on copying someone's work. So here we are. This is actually progressing into the document. This is the actual document that I used to create the mantra that you see at the end. The document I was working on before was just one I created for the sake of the tutorial. This is the actual one I was working on. So up above you can see that's all the line strokes I need to create this entire mantra. And all I'm doing is cutting and copying. Copying and pasting, I'm not cutting. And everything stays on the same layer. That's really important, otherwise you just get lost. You can sort of pop up a fresh layer if you need it for the sake of convenience, but you always want to be flattening down to one transparent layer, so you don't have to be looking for a layer. You just copy from one layer to the same layer. So here I've just pulled down that guide. I'm just getting a reference, trying to work out exactly how low that stroke in the va syllable should be. If you want to study about the correct spacing for the Tibetan alphabet, there's plenty of reference material online. there's a strict proportion to each of the characters, which needs to be followed within reason, and you'll find that information online. Now the tsek. This being a Tibetanized Sanskrit, I don't know Tibetanized Sanskrit well enough to be able to check this for accuracy. In fact, originally I thought it was incorrect. So I went online, did as much research as I could. This is a very uncommon mantra to see written. It's really, you almost wouldn't call it a mantra in the terms of it. It's not related to a specific deity, but it occurs in most sadhanas in highest yoga tantra that I'm aware of. And so you need to find a sadhana that has the Tibetan in it, or be able to get the original Tibetan document from one of the sources online to be able to check it. But I was lucky enough to find some reference material to check it. But if you're unable to do that, and you're just sort of at the mercy of the work that you're copying, and I shouldn't ever assume that things are correct, because often they're not. There's all sorts of mistakes come up. Even in the original Tibetan documents, often they were carved incorrectly, or the person that carved it didn't know how to spell the word necessarily. Particularly when it's something like this, so it's good to be able to find a source that's authentic and authoritative, and it's been checked for corrections. So here, pulling down that guide just to check how far that sha syllable should come down. Cleaning it up there. Now using this stroke, this is the shabkyu or the U vowel. Just adjusting the spacing there, moving the little dot across. The spacing is not overly critical in the way I'm working at the moment, because this will actually be converted into a circular mantra, as I showed in the beginning of the video, and then anything that's incorrect about the spacing is then corrected in the circular version. Now I made a mistake here, which I actually corrected later on, but it's not shown in this video. What I'm doing here, this syllable is nga, but it's not, it's a da or ta. Should to. And I've just drawn two ngas because I just kind of copied the Tibetan script below, but it should, the characters look similar when they're truncated like that. So if you're thinking that that's incorrect, you'd be right, and I corrected it in the finished version. So there, the double anuswara, doing a little transformation just to make them the same size, and then moving them into position. And you can see, if you look at the corresponding mantra below, that's been produced by the font, there's quite a large space there. That space shouldn't be quite so large, but the computer can only do so much. It can't, deal with every anomaly that occurs in a script, particularly in this Tibetanized Sanskrit. So that's one reason not to use, cookie cutter fonts when you're trying to produce art. So here's the head letter. And again, everything I need to make this is just being sampled from those very basic strokes that are sitting above. or not paying too much attention to, like when I'm zoomed in here, you might be thinking to yourself, oh, some of these the sections strokes are a little bit rough, but what I've got in mind here is the finished size of this in the picture. Sorry, the picture that I'm working on, and this will probably be about have a diameter of, I'd say, 8 centimeters. So so that means that each character would be, I'd be guessing, maybe 8 millimeters high or something like that. So I need to have a fair degree of that roughness or imperfection in each of the characters for it to look brushed at that scale, because the more you scale something down, the more crisp it will become. To the point where if it was actually drawn by hand at that scale, no one could ever draw that accurately. That's why typewriters were invented, for example. So it needs to have the inaccuracy of the human hand at that scale, if that makes sense. So here just compiling Ma. And just making some tiny little adjustments there. Whoop. There we go. So you can see now I'm working, things have sped up a lot, and I've got so much to sample from now. I can just copy some things directly across, which is what I'm doing here. So there's a whole character there I can just take straight across. And here's a whole section that I'm copying across. So as I said before, the more you get to sample from, things go very, very quickly. And once you've created your alphabet or your alphabet reference material, you can do anything in Tibetan that you like. And you just make little final, just small adjustments depending on the scale that you want it to be printed at. There, just double checking those characters. So a bit of a hint, whenever you see something you think, oh yeah, that's the same, I'll just copy it straight across. A little bell should go off on your head, and just be very careful at that point. I almost missed that, the difference between those characters. So the difference is there's an O vowel there, and the length of the vowel isn't as long as the version that I copied it from. So there's a difference between Shuddha and Shuddho. Okay, getting close to the end now. This is a good example of, so here, if you see what I'm looking at below, what I'm copying, there's a character there that I just didn't think should be there, so I took it out, assuming it was a mistake. And I still actually don't know why that's there, but all the mantras that I checked it against had it. So I'd love to know if anyone's a bit of a Sanskrit Tibetan geek. I'd love to know why that nya letter is there. And then now just finishing off with the she at the end, which is the long stroke that denotes the finish of a sentence, or in this case a mantra. So using 2 there. So I hope you've enjoyed that short tutorial. The next tutorial, part 2 of this one, will be creating a circular version of this mantra.